I want to try and get back to this feminist science idea. I still think I'm a long way away from the Lucy Irigaray Einstein's equation E equals mc squared is a sexed equation quotation, which is kind of where I'm trying to get to. But I do need to put some more building blocks in place. So what I want to think about today is the idea of feminine knowledge as opposed to masculine knowledge. And I know that sounds insane, it kind of sounds insane to me actually, I must say. But I think there was a way of making sense of it. And I want to get to that through through Hélène Cixous. Hélène Cixous is a Algerian French theorist. I really like her stuff actually, it's great. But one of the things that she talks about, which I've mentioned in a few videos, is she talks about binaries. It's in this essay called Sorties, I think, something like that. Anyway, she's talking about binaries, and the claim she makes there, and she's making it from the position of kind of literary and cultural theory, but it is supported elsewhere, which I'll try and come on to. She's basically saying that we have this tendency to clump things into binary distinctions, which, you know, is fairly straightforward. As I say, there's lots of evidence for that you find in cognitive science, for example. But what she says, which is relevant to what we're talking about here, is that she says one of the primary binaries, which in a sense gives form to many of the other binaries we've got, is the binary distinction between male and female. Obviously male and female is an opposition. It's one that we recognise, it's one that we're probably determined by evolutionary history to recognise, I would guess, I don't know, but it seems to be one of the important ones. And Hélène Cixous, as I say, draws on that and says that lots of other binaries like high, low, up, down, left, right, ends, means, process, product, hard, soft, all the various other binaries that we've got tend to align themselves with one or other of this primary binary, she says, between male and female. Now of course she might be wrong, it might not be the case that it's primary, but even if it's not primary, it certainly is a binary, and we do know from elsewhere that binaries tend to line themselves up, you know, so that they do tend to go together. Okay, so we've got this idea of the binary. Yeah, several things that I think are associated with that. One is to do with, for example, binaries of hard and soft. In a previous video I was talking about hard science as opposed to soft science. Hard sciences are sciences that seem to produce data which has some of the descriptive characteristics of hard objects. You know, it's fixed data, it's stable data, it's robust data. These are the kind of terminology that we use for certain kinds of data. It's permanent data. It doesn't change according to where you put it. It doesn't change according to who handles that data. It has the qualities of a very solid object, so we might call it hard data. Some other practices, scientific type practices, produce data which is not hard, which is what you might call soft. And of course it's a metaphor here, but nevertheless we call it soft. And that is data which isn't easily bounded. The data from the social sciences are typical of this, which isn't easily bounded. It does tend to change according to who fiddles around with it. It doesn't persist over time. Perhaps it may change as for example social conditions change, so the data that comes from social conditions changes. So it doesn't have that same kind of crystalline, well bounded hardness that some of the other kinds of data does. So there's a hard-soft distinction being made, and of course hard and soft is one of the distinctions which lines up under Hélène Cixous' male-female boundary, masculine-feminine boundary, I suppose I should say. Masculine lines up with hard, feminine lines up with soft in those usual distinctions. And other distinctions you might line up on that is that in this kind of process product or end means distinction, within the masculine column, that tends to be where products and ends are placed, whereas in the feminine column of that binary distinction you would put the means or the process. It isn't to say that, you know, women are interested in processes and men are interested in products. You might make that generalisation, but you probably miss a lot of complexity. But under this this distinction I'm talking about, those things tend to line up. Okay, and again you find those in certain sciences. Some scientific practices are much more closely associated with end products, and other scientific practices don't lend themselves to the construction of ends in quite the same way. Or some research practices, I should probably say. You know, some research practices do clearly produce data at the end of that process. Others don't, and here I'm thinking about practices like situated research or grounded research practices. Okay. Yeah, just one last thing on that. There's a really interesting little article in the Times Higher, which is the kind of industry newspaper for higher education professionals in the UK. And it was talking about this paper that's just been written. I'll try and find the name of the author. Called The Feminine University. And the argument this person makes in this article is that, you know, in the ways I've already talked about in terms of the binaries that Sisu indicates, is that universities themselves, the place, not only knowledge, but the places where knowledge is communicated, tend to align themselves to in ways that you might think of as feminine and masculine. And what she says is, the author, I can't remember her name unfortunately, is that universities have been increasingly moving towards a more prototypically and metaphorically masculine end of the spectrum, particularly in the UK. So universities are much more about products. Research at university is much more about impact. That's one of the scores on the research assessment exercises that go on in universities these days. Impact. Much more about industry, much more about hard data and applications, rather than you know, the kind of softer process-based, means-based. Yeah, the kind of softer stuff, open blue skies research tends to be out in favour of much more pointed, product-based research. So all that kind of stuff, the suggestion there is that the universities, you know, the places where knowledge practices are carried out are becoming increasingly more masculine. Those knowledge practices are more masculine in the Helen Sisu understanding the term. Yeah, and that really comes out of a great book called The University in Ruins, written some time ago. Can't remember the name of the author. But the argument in there again was that universities, which used to be places of kind of open learning, of divergent practices, of a kind of softer, more open-ended set of knowledge practices, are much more down to do with links to industry, much more to do with, as I say, endpoints and practical applications. Anyhow, I don't know how useful that will be later on, but I think I need to nail that. So something to do with knowledge and knowledge practices aligns itself to feminine and masculine in metaphorical terms, which of course is not to say that women do the feminine stuff and men do the masculine stuff. These are where those binaries play themselves out. Okay.